Hello everyone, this is Vinay here from Learn Coding with Vinay again. In this video, we will discuss constraint, column level constraint. So there are two kind of constraints in MS SQL. First one is the column level constraint, and second one is the row or table level constraint. Right now, column level constraints are not null, check, and default, and row or table level constraints are basically our keys: primary key, foreign key, unique key, right? So we'll not discuss this column row level constraint today. We will have another dedicated video for it, right? In this video we'll discuss the column level constraints, but let's first try to understand what is a constraint, right? In From the database perspective, it is a rules or restriction applied to a database column, so that only valid data goes into the database table, right? So and why we should do this, right? So actually specifying constraint on your database tables, right, make sure that the data integrity is maintained. Now, what is data integrity means? That only valid data goes in, invalid data will be eliminated, right? So basically, if we try to insert invalid data, it will generate an error, right? So first thing is that. Second thing is that it help us improve performance, because we know already that there are only valid data in the database. So indirectly, actually, it helps us improving the performance, right? So let's take an example of practical example and understand it. Let me enlarge the screen a little bit, right? So here is an example where we are creating an employee table. This C underscore is just my naming convention, so that I know that it is for this table is used for constraint explanation, right? Ideally the table name should be employee only, right? So let's understand this table definition. So we are creating a table called C underscore employee. Here we are marking ID, integer identity. This will be an auto generated number. At employee name, here employee name we have marked as varchar 100, and it is declared as not null, right? So basically this column will not allow null value insertion. Similar way, department is also marked as not null. Then next is email. Now email, we haven't written not null over here, so ideally email will allow null value to be inserted, right? Take an example of where ground staff workers, they usually won't have the email address, right? Probably they will have the mobile, but they won't have the email address. So for them we might have to keep email as null. So depending on our domain we are working upon, you will have to choose what to keep null and what not to keep null, right? So this is an example of it. Now next, mobile number, again it is not null and it is a numeric column. Now the next is birth date. Now again it is marked as not null, and at the same time we are having a check constraint that makes sure that whoever employee is joining our organization is either greater than equal to 18 years of old, right? Because usually that's what the norm says, government norm says, that the guy person will should have to be either 18 or 18 above to work at any organization, right? And here is also an example where we have combined two constraints, not null and check constraint, right? Now, the next one is active, which is marked as default one. So default is actually not a constraint, but it gives us a facility where if we are not passing a value, then the database engine will pick up the value for that column which is defined in the table definition. So over here, if we don't pass value for this is active column, then it will be taken as one, right? So let's take an example so we'll understand it better, right? And these are not null, check, and default are column level constraints. So basically they will only validate that particular column value. So here, not null defined, it will only check the value of this e name. It is not bother about any other columns or any other data, right? That's why they are called as column level constraints. Similar way, birth date, it will only check birth date. This constraint will apply only on the birth date column, and it will check the value of birth date, and if that validation passes, then the data will be inserted, and otherwise it won't. So let's take an example of this, and practical example. Let me create this table. Okay, so let me run this, and we don't have anything now, right? So let's try to insert a data into this. table, right? So here I am trying to insert a data, but I have not passed employee name over here. If you see, I am just passing department, email, mobile, and birth date. So name is missing, but name, ename, is defined as not null. So ideally this insert statement should fail. Let's see what is happening. See, cannot insert the value null into column ename table so and so. Column does not allow null. It gives us the clear message that we missed to specify employee column, and if you don't specify, try to insert null over there, and since the table definition says that ename does not accept null, it is generating error. Yeah. Take a next now. Let's take a next example where we are actually passing the ename, but from the its value we are passing null, right? So let's try to run this query and see what is happening. So this one also failed because we are passing the column, but the column value we are taking as null. So that is the reason it failed, right? Now let's take a look at the next example. So over here we are passing everything good, but the bond year, look at the bond year over here, it is 2020. So ideally this guy is only 5 years old now, today, which is 2nd of July 2025, right? So this guy is only 5 years old. So this data should not get into our database. So we can't hire someone who is only a 5 years old, right? Ideally. So this again failed. This time it says that the insert statement conflicted with the check constraint. So and so, and the conflict occurred in the database this and table this. So it gives us a clear error message what is failing, and the reason why it could not insert the data into the database table, right? Now let's take next example where everything seems to be correct, right? But one thing here, we are not passing is active column. See, if you see, we are just passing employee name, department, email, mobile, and birth date. Let's see what happens over here. If I go ahead and run this, it says one row is affected. If I go ahead and run this and check the database table, see, we passed these many values. So these values got inserted because they clear the definition of constraint. And this was is active column value. We did not pass it, but it took one. Why? Because it was marked default as one. So whenever something is marked as default, and if we don't specify value for it, it will pick up the value from the default definition. Right. Now let me take the next example. Over here, we are passing the is active value, right? And we are not passing one, we are passing zero. So let's see what will happen. One row got inserted. Let me run this and see, we have the second value in, right? And is active is inserted as zero because whenever the default value, the column where we have specified the default value as something, but we are passing the value, then the past value will be inserted. So over here 0 got inserted, right? And not the 1. If we have not specified it, then it would have been 1, right? Another thing to notice over here is, look at the email. Email is in email we passed null because email column we have not marked this as not null, right? So basically we can insert null into email, right? So this record got inserted because every other column constraint were cleared, right? Let's take one more example with product table. This time we are defining ID, product name, category, description, price. Product name, category, and product description, these are marked as not null. So we can't insert not in null in any of these three columns, right? And price, we have check constraint that price should always be greater than 0. So let me create this table. Let me run this query. We don't have anything now. Now let me try to run this, right? So over here again, we are not passing product name. Product name is missing. We are just passing category, product description, and price. So if I go ahead and run this, it will generate error, right? Similar way, let's take a next example where we are passing product name, category, product description, and price. But over here we are passing price at 0. And remember, we have check constraint on price column. So this ideally this should also fail, right? It got fail. Now let's take next example. Insert into the product table product name, category, product description, price. Here we are passing all correct value. So hopefully this will be inserted, right? Okay, so let's see if it got inserted, right? So we have water bottle got inserted, its ID is 3. Now let's try to even update this value, right? I'm trying to update the price as minus 10 rupees. So let's see what will happen. So it generated error for the same check constraint. Why? Because we were trying to update a price column value with something that did not pass the constraint definition, right? So not only insert, it will fail the update operation also, right? So hope you have a fair idea about not null, check and default constraint. But let's take another interesting case actually. So over here, I have defined an employee leave table where usually what we'll be doing, we'll have employee ID, from date and to date, from where and from which date to which date employee has applied the leave, and leave status, whether it is applied, you know, and then once the leave is applied, your project manager or your superior will review it, and whether they will, based on that review, they will either approve, reject, right? And sometime even the employee can cancel the applied leave also, right? So these are few status that can be that can be inserted in the leave status column, right? But understand the definition over here from the constant perspective. So ID, employee ID, we have specified as not null. From date, we have specified as not null. To date, we have specified as not null, and at the same time to date should be greater than equal to from date, because from date will be a date in the from date will always be smaller date than the to date. That's how we usually apply for leave, right? So if you go to some leave application, if we go and select date, so maybe for from date we will say 2, from to date we will say 4, we'll select 4, right? So that how the user interface will be, right? And we should have a validation on the front end also, but if we have validation at the back end, then we are double safe, right? So over here we have 3 column marked as not null. Again, on the to date we are having constant that to date should be greater than equal to from date, and we have specified leave status and marked this as a default. So whenever employees apply the leave for the first time, the status of it will be applied, right? So let's try to create this table and see what happens. See, it generated error, says that column check constraint for column to date references another column. So remember, we started the discussion saying that these are column level constraints. They can only check your column values, right? So if you have something that that is dependent on another column, right? So then in that case, you cannot you cannot write your create statement like I have written over here, right? So you cannot specify it at column level. You will have to do it at table level. So let's check below example. Here we have specifying these 3 column, again not null, not null. Leave status again the same, but the check constraint, now we are specifying the check constraint at the table level, not the column level over here or something, and we specified at the end. And this check constraint, we can give it a name. If we don't give the name, the database engine will apply its own naming convention. Okay. So let's try to create this table and see what is happening. So table got created. If I go out and run, I don't have we don't have anything over here, right? So let's look at the table definition and let's try to understand this insert. So insert into table name, see employee leave. From date, we are passing from date, to date, and leave status, but we are not passing employee ID, which is marked as not null. So ideally, this will fail, right? It got failed. Now the next example. Here we are passing employee ID, from date, to date, but we are not here we are not passing the to date and from date in a desired manner, right? To date is before the from date over here. This is right. So if I go ahead and run this will also fail. Right. Now let's take a look at the next example. Here I am passing the employee ID, from date, to date. I am not passing the status, right? And here the dates are in correct manner of the constraint, right? So from, let me see what do we have from date. So from date is, let's say this is August of 1st, and to date is August of 3rd. So let me go ahead and run this. This got inserted, right? And let's see what do we have in the C employee leave table. Right, so we have the data correctly 102 from date to date, and we have the default value applied also, because if you see, we haven't passed the status column and we haven't passed the value for it as well. But since it is marked as default, it picked up the default value which is applied, right? So I hope you have fair idea now about column level constraint, not null, check, and default. So if you like this video, subscribe to my channel, which is Learn Coding with Vinay-SQL for Developers. And thanks for watching this video. See you in the next video. Thanks a lot, guys.